2023, the chair recognizes a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for 30 minutes.
Thank the Speaker, and I thank my friend from Texas for his service to this great country, both in uniform and here in this body. And I'm honored to serve with him. I'm honored to serve with all of the great members of Congress that wore the uniform, and I appreciate his remarks just now, honoring many of those who have served and were properly awarded and recognized, and many of his own constituents. It's an honor to serve with you. Just as an honor to serve with the Speaker, also from Texas. I'm reminded as I listen to my friend from Texas of the engagements that I had with veterans that I represent in the 21st Congressional District in Texas between Austin and San Antonio just over August. One of the great things about when you are in your work period is engaging with your constituents, and they have a funny way of reminding you why they sent us here. And I had countless veterans, civilians, asking me what's happening to their country. And many veterans, several men later in life, breaking down in tears, asking questions like, what did they fight for? To watch what's unfolding currently under this administration, what's happening to the country that they believe in. So my question right now for my colleagues in this chamber is, when will it be enough? When will what we're experiencing, seeing with our own eyes every day, be enough for us to act? And I'm not just speaking to colleagues on my side of the aisle, but the whole chamber. We have a responsibility under the Constitution of the United States to stand up in a government of separated powers and check an executive branch that is flouting the law on a daily basis. This is an administration that is engaging in utterly lawless acts on a daily basis. And it is resulting in the endangerment of not just individual American citizens, but the republic itself. And that is not hyperbole, and I don't say it lightly, because I very much share the optimistic tenor of my colleague from Texas who just spoke on the floor, talking about the hope that he has for this country, given the strength of this country in its past and the strength of so many of our American people. But as a friend of mine and a good mutual friend of my friend from Texas, Mr. Elsie, former Governor Rick Perry, wrote in the first chapter of a book about a decade ago, America is great. Washington is broken. And it remains broken, badly broken, no longer following the constitutional guidelines set forth, no longer serving the American people, and as the Constitution calls for, carrying out the general welfare of the people and securing the blessings of liberty. That's literally what our call is as servants in Washington. And so my question again is, when will it be enough? There's a long laundry list of things that should be giving us great pause. Actual existential crises. Spending. We will spend $2 trillion more this year than we take in. We are $32 trillion in debt, barreling towards 33, barreling towards 34, and we just passed the debt ceiling increase of $4 trillion, frankly, probably more than that. And oh, by the way, our interest payments are now more than what we spend on national defense. Inflation is rampant. Are we going to do anything about it? The resounding answer currently from this body is no. We continue to fund appropriations bills that spend more than last year. It's just going up. Are we going to do anything about spending? When will it be enough? How about our Defense Department? This Defense Department is undermining our national defense by turning our military into what I describe as a social engineering experiment in a uniform. President Biden's Pentagon is outright ignoring the law by funding abortion tourism with taxpayer funding, in blatant violation of the traditional bipartisan agreement under the Hyde Amendment to not do that. Let states decide. That's what the court just said. We continue to fund it with federal dollars. President Biden's Pentagon is using millions of taxpayer dollars to fund gender transition procedures. The Air Force released a memo entitled Department of the Air Force Observance of LGBTQ Pride Month, which empowered installation commanders to plan and conduct activities in honor of Pride Month. Now, color me crazy and reactionary that I think that every single dollar that we fund to the Department of Defense ought to go to planes, boats, bullets, bombs, missiles, and trained soldiers to use them. Our military is paying chief diversity officers and inclusion officials upwards of $183,000 a year. The United States Marine University is a year-long program that is dedicated to exploring gender and security issues. According to the official syllabus, which we found because we saw it on Twitter when they were trying to defend their position, they discuss program themes like, quote, gendering war, with questions like what is gender and how is it different from biological sex? Or how war narratives are constructed through gender discourse. Again, we're $2 trillion in debt. Our recruiting levels are in the toilet at the Pentagon. China is building their military, and this is what we're funding. It's not like we have a $2 trillion surplus. What are we doing? Do you really think having Marines discuss how, quote, war narratives are constructed through gender discourse helps us win a war? COVID. The hysteria and the tyranny are already on the march again. This week, we learned that CIA whistleblowers told the COVID Select Committee that the CIA bribed its analysts to deny the lab leak theory. The whistleblower claims that 6 of 7 analysts believed that the evidence pointed toward the Wuhan lab leak theory. The 6 were then given a, quote, significant monetary incentive to change their position. How about health? We're funding a healthcare system broken by Washington and big insurance, and average Americans can no longer afford healthcare, no longer go to the doctors of their choice. Obamacare is set to cost you 6% more in 2024. Some plans may spike 10%. When I had cancer about 11 years ago, I went to MD Anderson. To the best of my understanding, under the Obamacare plan that I would have to use as a member of Congress, I wouldn't be able to go to MD Anderson. How is that coverage? How are we doing that to the American people? But don't fear. Big insurance revenue reached $1.25 trillion and profits hit $70 billion, a 300% increase in revenue and a 300% increase in profits from just 10 years ago. Life is good for big insurance. United Health Group, $20.6 billion up, 16% year over year. Cigna, $6.7 billion up, 24% year over year. CVS Health, $4.2 billion. Humana, $2.8 billion. Meanwhile, the average American family spends more than $22,000 a year on premiums, which is expected to increase 6.4% this year. In 23, we will spend more than $1 trillion subsidizing insurance. Yes, we're borrowing another $1 trillion to subsidize those insurance companies I was just describing. You like corporate cronyism? Well, you've got it. How about energy? Are any of these things going to be enough? Healthcare, COVID, Department of Defense, wokeism, energy. We're actively destroying our ability to have reliable energy to the benefit of China and a bunch of elitists who don't live in reality. The Inflation Reduction Act has essentially a $1.2 trillion handout to subsidize billion-dollar corporations. Something like 90% of the subsidies are to billion-dollar corporations. pretty much heavily led by very rich, white, elitist liberals, making money hand over fist with your subsidized money, giving money to China to fund solar panels from China, battery-powered cars, batteries with cobalt mined in the Congo, almost entirely by slave labor, heavily including children. Your taxpayer dollars and borrowed money at work. Yet it's not even producing a good result for the American people. Energy prices have increased by 40% since Biden took office. Gasoline is up over 50%. Electricity is up almost 30%. And while oil is at $90 a barrel, our strategic petroleum reserve is at its lowest level since 1983 because the president has been dumping the strategic petroleum reserve in order to try to keep gas prices down while advancing a radical leftist agenda that is making it impossible for us to have affordable energy. The Inflation Reduction Act expands subsidies for electric vehicles, 78% of which are claimed by Americans making over $100,000. Of course, because the average EV costs $17,000 more than one with the internal combustion engine, which this administration wants to end. They don't want you to have an affordable car. And then Secretary Granholm decides to go on a trek across the country to prove how great electric vehicles are. Goes up to a charging station. They're running behind. We got to find a charging station. They take a gas-powered vehicle, put it in a slot, block the slot, the secretary can get a photo op, and a family with a baby with an EV was sitting there waiting for a slot and couldn't get one. That's your Biden administration at work trying to promote the propaganda of a left-wing radical vision for energy that is destroying the hardworking Americans' ability to live their lives. Poor people across this country, working-class people across this country are wondering how they can afford a car because of this administration is living in a dreamland that won't dent carbon dioxide. India and China are dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. You could get rid of every internal combustion engine in America and you will drop CO2 production by like 1.5%. It's insane. We're unilaterally disarming our competitiveness, our security advantage with respect to energy, and empowering China in the process. Meanwhile, the Biden administration's EPA has implemented a rule that would force 2/3 of the new vehicles sold in the United States to be EVs by 2030. You can't make this up. That's a direct assault on the well-being of the American people. And what are we in Congress doing about it? We passed a bill today trying to pull back on some of California's nonsense. We're really good at that, ladies and gentlemen. Passing bills, knowing they'll die in the Senate, going home and campaigning about how crazy the administration is, and then putting all our eggs in the basket of one day in the future. Trust us, when we have the biggest majority in the House and we have 60 in the Senate and we have that president one day all at once, trust us, we'll get it done. How's that working out for you? When will we use the tools we have before us right now? We have the power of the purse. Last time I checked, Republicans have the majority in this body. We should use the power of the purse to stop the radical abuses of this president and his administration. Again, spending $2 trillion deficit. Are we going to do anything about it besides, it's a little better than what they would have done? Are we going to do anything about energy? We passed a bill. Are we going to do anything about it? Are we going to do anything about those health care prices? Are we going to do anything about the continued advancement of COVID tyranny, mask mandates, vaccine mandates, importantly, the subsidy of vaccines to be forced upon American people? Are we going to do anything about it? Anything about the Pentagon? The Department of Justice, instead of focusing on locking up bad guys, and I say this as a former federal prosecutor who locked up a few bad guys, instead of doing that, this Department of Justice is advancing a politicized form of injustice against American citizens and a former president. My friend Scott Smith in Loudoun County, Governor Glenn Youngkin just pardoned Scott Smith. Now, remember, he was targeted as a domestic terrorist in conjunction between the National School Board Association and the Department of Justice for going to a school board meeting to defend his daughter. Mark Houck in Philadelphia, he was targeted, had a SWAT team show up at his door in Philadelphia because he dared to defend his son while engaging in his free speech rights in front of an abortion clinic. The FBI is weaponizing the so-called FACE Act to target pro-life Americans, overwhelmingly targeting only pro-life Americans when they go engage in their free speech rights. And of course, they're targeting former President Trump, doing all they can to target the former president while also doing all they can to ensure that Hunter Biden and President Biden do not face justice. Under the Department of Justice, we have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Early this year, the ATF issued a rule banning pistol stabilizing braces that are intended for recruiting shooters with physical disabilities and disabled veterans. That rule potentially makes felons out of up to 40 million Americans. Wasn't made in Congress, wasn't codified here. It was made by bureaucrats. Now they're targeting private sales, trying to promote a universal background check despite the fact Congress has rejected it. How about your food? Will we do anything about food? We're ceding control of our food supplies to foreign nations because our government is making it really difficult, if not impossible, to farm in this country. The USDA projected the U.S. would become a net importer of food for the first time in its entire history in 2023. Foreign ownership of U.S. agricultural land doubled from 2009 to 2019. China's agricultural investment in other nations has grown by more than tenfold since 2009. And Chinese companies are purchasing land near key defense installations. What are we doing about it? What is this Republican majority in this Congress doing about it? The IRS. We're still fully funding an IRS, and it just received a massive expansion. Yet, this IRS targets political opponents. In 2021, the IRS targeted the nonprofit status of my friend Bunny Pound's group, Christian Engaged, for simply being an organization that encourages Christians to vote. It's not the first time. Remember Lois Lerner? The IRS has a history of this. What are we doing about it? We keep writing the checks to fund the bureaucrats that are at war with the American people. We do it every day, and everybody just shrugs. They just walk around and they say, Chip, don't you understand? The Democrats control the Senate. Joe Biden's in the White House. We just got a position to win an election next year, and then we'll fight. Do you know how many times I've heard that? When I was Senator Cruz's chief of staff 10 years ago, when I was a lawyer in the Senate Judiciary Committee 15 years ago, it's all I've ever heard. Trust us. One day, we will use the power that we have in this body to change the trajectory of this country and to stop this weaponization of the federal government against the American people. And you can't ignore that that's what it is. When the Department of Justice is not blind and it is targeting people based on their political beliefs and targeting a former president instead of the current president because of its political beliefs, that destroys the rule of law in this country. When the Department of Defense is more concerned about being woke than actually being weaponized against our enemies, that destroys morale and recruiting. when the IRS is targeting people for their political beliefs, you don't have faith in your system of government. When your energy department is more concerned about advancing a radical leftist agenda than ensuring our own national security and our own ability to power our people, our jobs, our ability to travel, you're funding the very mechanisms of government that are undermining the liberty and the freedom of people's right to go have a job, right to go provide for their family. And perhaps worst of all, the southern border. In July alone, Border Patrol encountered across this country 240-something thousand individuals. Reports today indicate that preliminary CBP data show migrant encounters for August are on track to surpass 230,000, making it the sixth month in 2023 above 200,000. On Tuesday, reports surfaced that CBP apprehended more than 7,300 individuals across the southern border, I believe maybe 9,000 nationally. 3 of the 4 busiest Border Patrol sectors were in Texas. The El Paso sector had 1,100 illegal crossings. The RGV sector, 1,400. The Del Rio sector, 1,800. We've had 10,000 criminals caught at the border in FY23. But here's the thing. With over 1 million gotaways, who are we not catching? What do we do about the stories we just saw unfold in Pennsylvania, where a guy was charged with crimes in Brazil, came to our country, brutally stabbed to death his girlfriend, then he's on a jailbreak in Pennsylvania, illegal, not legally present? How about the 11-year-old boy in Ohio who just died because someone released by the president ran into a school bus on the first day of school? An 11-year-old boy dead by someone here illegally released by this president. According to the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security, DHS has the wrong addresses for 177,000 of the nearly 1 million people released into the United States between the spring of 21 and the summer of 22. Think about that. Many of those addresses were used more than 50 times each. A car dealership, a bus station, a restaurant in Maryland, a church in Illinois were the addresses used. Who are they and where are they? If 99% of them are great people looking for a better way of life, God bless them. What about the other 1%? You feel good about that? You feel secure in the United States, do you? Because as you drive around your suburban enclaves and you feel safe and secure, this is going to catch up to you. Just like the New Yorkers who are starting to wake up and say, oh, this is kind of a problem. Yeah, it's a problem. The problem is there's a human toll. These are human beings. An illegal immigrant in Baltimore who was being held up for ransom for $23,000 while his wife and little girl were in a stash house in Fort Worth, Texas. And they called him up and said, we're going to rape your little girl if you don't give us $23,000. Is that what we're for in this country? Are we for perpetuating the sex trafficking trade, human trafficking trade, and slave labor? Are we for what's happening to our Border Patrol, where we're losing Border Patrol because they're being lied about by this Department of Homeland Security? Are we for 1 million people being released into the United States in a year? Are we for the criminal activity we just saw in Pennsylvania or the boy in Ohio? Are we for all of the migrants now in New York? Are we for the young man who came in as an unaccompanied alien child? A family took him into his home and he stabbed the father and killed him? Is that what we're for? And if we're not for it, what the hell are we going to do about it? Besides preen, posture, campaign, and say, oh, yeah, we're going to do something about the border one day. Trust us, one day. Well, that day is now. If we don't secure the United States, we shouldn't fund the agencies that refuse to secure it. That's what this is about. When my Democratic colleagues complain in October if we're unable to find a resolution to fund the United States government, I want them to look squarely in the mirror. It is you who is causing it. It is you who is abandoning your responsibility to secure the border of the United States. It is you that is causing little girls to get sold in the sex trafficking trade. It is you that is causing ranches in Texas to get overrun. It is you that is causing criminals to get released into the United States. It is you that is undermining our strength in the Western Hemisphere, empowering China, empowering cartels to undermine our national security. And over my dead body, am I going to say that I'm going to support funding a government that refuses to do its job to secure the border? And that's what the House of Representatives should be saying in unison to a president flouting the law. That's what this is about. Our founders gave us the power of the purse. James Madison wrote about it in the Federalist Papers. It's not just a happenstance that the House of Representatives has that power. In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "When a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them, the people, under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security." When they created our government and gave us the Constitution, they gave us tools to avoid that. But let's be very clear. What happened to us? That declaration outlined 27 grievances. I've listed more than that just here. A complete abandonment of the job and the responsibility of the federal government, leaving the state of Texas $10 billion poorer while it tries to do the job the federal government is supposed to do. The American colonists protested because they weren't represented in Parliament. I would suggest right now that the American people, frankly, aren't being well represented in this body. Because this body is letting the executive branch run over them every bit as much as King George III was doing to the colonists in 1776. You think it's hyperbole? Look at our border. Look at our system of justice. Look at our energy economy. Look at our level of spending. A complete abandonment of our job. Where are we? Why even go home this weekend? Why were we gone in August? Why aren't we right here forcing the conversation, forcing Senator Schumer and the president to come down to the Republican-led House of Representatives and say enough? It's enough. Enough to open borders, enough to a devastating energy policy, enough to lawlessness, enough to targeting the American people. Enough words, enough promises. It's time to fight. And if we're not going to secure the United States of America, we shouldn't fund the government that refuses to do so. We should stand up and fight to defend the people that sent us here to fight for them. I yield back.